So I again want to welcome our on-site and online audience. We're all glad that you are here. I guess it's time to start again. We are going to begin our first session with the Teacher's Top 10 Tips for Teaching Newcomers by Suzanne Fitzpatrick from TEAL. And I want to welcome Suzanne and ask her to introduce herself to our audience more. Suzanne?
We know it's nap time after food, but we want to try to do it.
Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you, Khatare. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch, and I'm following in some big footsteps here, coming up after Jim, the man who's got all the research at his fingertips, can give us the names of the researchers, and he joins the dots for us all. This is a very different kind of presentation. I'm essentially going to be, we'll say, boiling down the essence of what I think is really important dealing with newcomer population, whether they're immigrants or whether they are refugees. So a bit of a change of pace. Initially as a teacher, I worked in Toronto, inner city schools full of immigrants and refugees. And in January of 2009, I was very blessed to have my dream job come to me. And I was the Literacy, Enrichment, and Academic Readiness for Newcomers teacher at Brother Rice for 12.5 years. So I was the first intermediate learned teacher. And in many ways, that was a real blessing. So number one always is keep students happy, especially the newcomer population. Because, first of all, part of their adjustment to a new environment is what's now being referred to as cultural bereavement. And apparently in the next issue of the DSM, this is going to be in there as bona fide emotional and behavioral reality. Cultural bereavement is essentially adjusting to your new environment. A lot of newcomers go through it's a period of homesickness and depression, grappling with a new language, losing your language, or at least sort of like it feels that way because it's drifting away from you. You're not in your culture, you're learning a new culture, and it's a very complex and challenging time. And I think any of us, if we have left where we were born and raised and moved elsewhere, we have insight into that experience.
It's ongoing.
Yes, yes, absolutely. For a lot of students, especially refugee students who've come from a very, usually very chaotic, violent background, they've experienced horrors that a lot of us don't even want to contemplate. Really, school needs to be their refuge. It needs to be their happy place. It needs to be a place where they can walk in and they feel welcome and accepted in the building. I've got their talk to students. Now, I got a bone to pick with some teachers because I find some teachers, a lot of times they'll meet a newcomer and, you know, they'll sort of pick at them like, oh, where are you from? And all this kind of stuff. And like, that's part of getting to know somebody. That's part of somebody's personal narrative. But sometimes people are not really filtering what they're doing and they're asking students like, well, what brought you here? So those are the kind of questions you never really want to ask. And you never really want to either get into this, oh, how do you say this in your language? Yes, to a certain extent, but your role is there to help them learn, adjust, adapt, and thrive in your environment. It's not like a free course in Arabic or whatever for you. So when I say talk to students, yes, you're getting to know them as an individual. Ask them, you know, where did you live before? Who's living with you in your house? Ask how family members are doing. Because for a lot of these students when they come here, there's such a big power shift within the home, where the parents are the ones really struggling with the language. They're learning more quickly. And also sometimes too, the reality is that their adults are grappling with some deep traumas and mental health issues or whatever. So, just see the child as somebody who's from a bigger community and tap into that. Yes, acknowledge their difficulties and challenges. Like sometimes I find when you become close to a student, the next thing they're telling you about these horrific things that happen to them. And you've got to really hear that. You've got to thank and honor them for sharing that with you and feeling comfortable enough to share that with you. I always try to really affirm to students that, I'm really sad that you went through that, but you're not the only one, sadly, like lots of people have. And people who've survived those kind of things say it's made them who they are and it's made you stronger. So do you think, that's a possibility for you? So you really need to, like Jim was saying, affirm their identity, affirm their experiences, but also show them that, the future is ahead and the world can be theirs. I also think you need to do your homework. And I read extensively from UN publications, and also, yes, the CIA. The CIA from the United States has an extensive repertoire of information about every country you can imagine. And it's all free. So a lot of times when I got a student from a new place, like I started reading up, what can I find in English that really informs me about that country and about their background, and just doing your homework, you can figure out a lot of things, and you don't have to ask the student. Also, I think as educators, we need to be really reflective. Now, when I say keep them happy, the them really includes you as well. You have to be happy as a teacher. And sometimes teachers have come to me and said, like, oh, they're doing this in the class, they're not listening, and blah, blah, blah. And I always tell teachers, you can't expect the students to change until you change what you're doing. So you change what you're doing, make whatever's going on more engaging or more important to them, and then they will follow. Number 2, watch your language. Because, as we all know, every language is full of idioms and abbreviations and slang terms. So you've got to make that explicit. And, as a teacher, sometimes I've written words on boards, and I've hoped, I hope nobody walks by to see this word on the board. But students bring them in, like, what does this word mean? What's a skeet, miss? And you've got to explain it. You have to do a lot of direct instruction. And I'm not saying don't use certain abbreviations or terms or idioms. But when you do, explain it. And I've always thought that if a newcomer student is in a room with Canadian-born kids, there's still probably a percentage of that Canadian-born population that also doesn't understand. So when you make explicit for one group, you're really educating and helping all of them. Slow down. And in Newfoundland, we love to talk fast. And I always tell other people, when you speak, people are hearing you for the first time. Slow down. Let people process what you're saying. A long time ago, one of my students in Toronto said, "Miss, you have a sticky voice." And I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, because what you say, it sticks with us." So I thought that was really quite the compliment. Observe. What I mean by that is read the room, read the faces, look at what students are telling you from their face. When we were online and the students were given the option of not being live and just having like an icon or avatar up, it really drove me crazy because I didn't know what was going on. And I would have to explain to students, like, I need to be able to see what you're doing in order for me to know what I'm doing. So, observe and explain. Be succinct and concise. Really, teachers talk too much. And we really have to weight every word with meaning and importance. I don't want to belabor that point. When you write, same kind of thing. If you're going to use any kind of abbreviation, slang term, idiom, explain it. Just, put it in a footnote, or just embed the definition right behind it, or put a synonym in. Provide definitions for students, and provide images. The old adage, the picture says 1,000 words. It's so true. We learn so much visually. And again, be succinct and concise, especially test materials. The bane of the Learn and EAL teacher is looking at tests that the students have brought to you, and every multiple choice question is like a paragraph of reading. And if you look at what a lot of teachers are saying, you can just slash a huge percentage of the words out of there. And there have been times when teachers have given me tests to say, well, can you check it to make sure it's all right for your Learn students? And I just go to it and I give it back to them. And you can see it's a revelation, because they realize, I don't have to work this hard to say what I want. So, concision and being succinct, very helpful. Number 3, think globally. And I mean think globally in all ways. For example, your curriculum. Choose materials that reflect who's in front of you. For example, elementary school teachers. If you've got an influx of newcomers, refugees in your class, teach the breadwinner. It will explain so much about what brought people here. Also, one of the things I always love to do when you're teaching, and it's easy, I know, for English teachers. For example, you're teaching poetry or you're teaching folklore. Get some poetry that's been translated from whatever language. Like, the world is full of poetry. And let students, if they're doing presentations, especially older secondary students, let them choose somebody who writes from their culture or their language. I've always said to students, well, if you're going to share a piece, you're going to have to translate it. And students will take that on because they're invested in who these poets are or who these writers are. They're proud to bring it to their classmates. Another global reality is teaching to all modalities. Stop talking, show images, get the students doing. We learn so much more by seeing and ultimately by doing. So that needs to be on all of us to essentially teach the same material in different ways. It's fun, the students get it, everybody's happy. Also, don't reinvent the wheel. There's so much great material out there on the internet. For example, if you're teaching EAL, there's tons of British websites that you can tap into. So, talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers, see what they're using. I'm sure every teacher in this room has their little list of, these are the websites I love. And you can get so much material from there. And there's all kinds of places now to get free resources. You don't always have to go to teachers, pay teachers. It's out there free. But also, this comes as a warning, don't fall down the rabbit hole of the internet. You don't need to be looking for the same thing for 10 hours, right, or however many hours. Find what you need, move on. Number 4, put students to work. Don't work so hard. Get them to do the work. Use big projects, put them in groups, like Jim was talking about. You know, you have groups from various linguistic groupings. Get them to do a project about their home country or about their city or whatever. Get them to do the work. And also, as Jim was saying, you're affirming their identity. And sometimes students come to you and say, you know what, I never really knew why that happened in my country. Now I know. So they're really learning things about their own family's history, their own people's history. Challenge them with problem-solving work. And foster group work and collaboration. Now, look, I've taught junior high. I know that not always do they somehow magically know how to work together. But there's lots of material out there. How to work in groups. What roles people can take in groups. Sometimes if you just take one period to teach students how to work with each other, you're going to save yourself a lot of anguish. And if you've got students doing all the research and they're putting the projects together and you're letting them function in their language, so they're initially grappling with the material in their language, later it's translated into English, you know, you're functioning as really a facilitator. So like, get out of the way, let them work. Number 5, get out in the field. The first high school Jana and I taught together at in Toronto, I used to be known as the field trip queen. And like, think about it. You know, all these academics, they're always getting these big grants so they can go out in the field. All these guys and women with their PhDs out there learning in the field. But then so often we keep all these kids who learn naturally through play and engagement, we're keeping them in the classroom. Like, get them outside. It's so powerful and it's so easy for them to learn in that environment. You know, for example, if you're teaching about Canadian government, for God's sake, take them down to City Hall or to Confederation Building or to the Government House. Don't be talking about that stuff in the classroom. Get out there. And like, the students will remember and will learn so much more. Also, especially for a newcomer population, particularly refugees, it's just so positive and healing to get out. To be outdoors, to have a sense of play, to be in nature. And like, all the research is very clear. If you are outside 15 to 20 minutes every single day, you normally have better mental health and well-being. So like, get them outdoors. And it's not always extra work. You know, what you can do is create like one giant permission form, listing off all the places you may or may not go, but this is like your dream list. Send it home, get parents to sign it at the beginning of the year. You have it on file, you do it once, off you go. Now, if there was ever an image to show how I put my curriculum together, I was going around in circles, but forever upward. And what I mean about going around in circles is, normally we don't learn something the first time we are exposed to it. We need multiple exposures. So don't just teach something once and think, oh, you know, I taught that back on October 10th, everybody has got that now. It's like, no, I would say 90% of the students have completely forgotten that now. But if that's something that's important in terms of, you know, scaffolding learning or sequential learning, just loop around and review it, refresh. And you don't have to spend all day doing this. You know, you can ask students, oh, who remembers what we did about so-and-so? Get them to teach each other. But like, drop back often. And I find they go much further ahead when you go around in circles like this. Now, getting testy. Oh boy, lots to be said about that. As Jim was saying, keep students away from all of those tests that are used for determination of exceptionalities, because they do not work on a population of students where they are learning a new language. But are they beneficial for our students? I think so, and I'm being a bit of a renegade now because I know, especially at the elementary and intermediate level, there's this move away from testing. But a lot of times students become much more serious when there's a quiz or a test involved. And one of the things I did at Brother Rice was, we had 3 terms. At the end of every term, I gave them a cumulative test. So in June, it was going all the way back to September. And they were remembering things, they knew things, they were exposed multiple times, it was part of their knowledge base. And you know, during the lockdowns, there was a real backing away from testing, and for a lot of valid reasons. And it was really kind of startling to see how much my students were forgetting, or how much my students were letting go of in terms of the learning that had previously occurred. So I think we can't throw away tests. And also, if you look at the real world, to get a job at Sobeys, you've got to go home and do an online module and do an exam or a test at the end of it. If you're working as an automotive technician, you constantly have to take online courses and pass exams. It's out there, it's part of the reality. So teach students how to be successful test takers. Teach them the tips. Be explicit. You know, teach the learning strategies that they need to succeed. Again, be succinct and concise, and use technology. About, I'd say maybe 5 years ago, I started doing all of my assessment materials using Google Forms. And it was a revelation, because if I had given my students a pencil and paper test, a lot of times it was like, miss, 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 miss. You know, I was like doing the shuttle, I felt like a pinball, yes, a pinball, you know, in a machine, right? Anyway, so the very first time I gave them a Google form as their assessment piece, suddenly I was sitting there doing nothing. It's like, how is this happening? I was stunned. And like I asked the students afterwards, and if you are doing that kind of test, you're only seeing one question at a time. You can embed better images so students know what the graph is all about or the graphic is. Because I'm trying not to criticize the NLESD, but not all photocopying material or equipment works the way we need it to work. So all those problems are gone. And even sometimes in some buildings, there's like so much stress on the teacher getting things printed. Anybody else have that experience? You know, like that's a huge stress. Well, if it's all online, you don't need to worry about getting paper to fit the photocopier. So it also works from, I would give students a quiz, I'd look at the results. Sometimes, you know, I realize, oh my God, this question is not clear, or everybody is missing this, so I'd have to go back and reteach. Then when it's time to do the test, you just make a copy of the quiz, you switch it around, change it up a bit, and you give it to them. And because I always allowed it to be marked and returned to them immediately so they could immediately see what they had trouble with, like, it's kind of funny, you know, you wouldn't expect students to be so engaged and committed to investigating that and learning, but they are. So use technology for your assessments. It will really truly make your life easier. And even for big written pieces, right? Then they have, you know, thesaurus and dictionaries and translators at their fingertips. Don't handicap students. Let them do their best work. Ah, yes, beating the same drum. I don't think I need to say much more about that, because nowadays we have Google Workspace here in Newfoundland, and I know across Canada there's different platforms sometimes used. But let technology be your friend. Let the students, you know, engage with it, teach them how to use it, teach them how to behave appropriately online, and off you go. But also too, with technology, there's so much out there. Number 9, use community resources. You're not alone in this world. First question is, what's in walking distance? Get the students out there. At Brother Rice, we have a graveyard next to us. Fabulous for social studies and math. My students were unleashed in the graveyard multiple times. Find the oldest grave, the most recent grave. Find the person who lived the longest, the person who lived the shortest. What names are we finding here? Who's buried here? And come back with your observations and questions. So, there's a lot that you can do, and it's really powerful learning for students. Lots of local organizations and initiatives will actually come in and do all kinds of free things for you, or you could take your students there. Look to professional associations, for example, the Bar Society. They have a law day. They will send lawyers to your school to talk about how to be a lawyer, or what lawyers do. Other teachers, and take care of yourself. Go to your employee assistance program if you need it, which leads me to, as my son's wife always says, self-care is important. And I got the slide straight out of one of those demos in Google Slides. This is the most important takeaway that everyone has to remember. You got to take care of yourself. Being a teacher is stressful, nonstop work. Listening to people grapple with a new language is challenging and exhausting. And dealing with students who are, sharing with you these horrors that they've survived, it can really wear you down. But you have to be Zen-like. When you go into a classroom, you have to be grounded, you have to be present, you have to be mindful. Find out what makes you happy. I would say number 1, sleep. And limiting all the bad things like alcohol and caffeine. We know we're not going to solve our troubles, or are just going to make our lives more, we'll say, unfolding and falling apart. Eat well and schedule your exercise. You got to do what you love, whether that's yoga or playing hockey or running up and down the hills of St. John's. Do what makes you happy, and do it regularly. And as a teacher, you got to do what you love. If you are not excited about getting out of bed every morning to go and see those people waiting for you, you need some self-reflection. But hopefully everybody will agree that this is the best job ever. Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we can take a couple of questions. I have a question. I'd love to see an example of one of your Google assessments.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll share them all with you.
Yeah, I'm 33, but I'm not tech savvy at all, and I would like to be more tech savvy. So.
One of the things that shocked me when we went into the first lockdown was that a lot of teachers really didn't know how to deal with Google Workspace. And you don't have to be afraid. All you gotta do is ask your colleague, how do you do this? If you don't know it, I always used to say to my student, it's only scary what you don't know. And if you know it, then suddenly it's easy. So, teachers have to demonstrate to students and model, yeah, we're learners too. So don't be afraid, yeah. But I can share tons of stuff with you and go, you'll be cursing me. Why did I ever say that?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
How do you manage at the end of the day to schedule exercise, or you just get up earlier?
No, I'm not a morning person, never have been. I'm, a wake up, where's my coffee kind of person. Not a morning person at all, as some of you may know, getting emails from me at 1, 2 in the morning. Normally I would do it right after school, and in fact it was a great, I essentially had 2 dogs imposed on me. My husband had to have one and my daughter. And then I realized, these dogs are not being walked, so I started walking dogs after school. And even now to this day, if they're not being walked and it's 20 to 4, they're yowling and howling like they're being tortured. And I used to come home, get the dogs, and off I'd go, and I found that I would have to walk for about 3 kilometers before all that was let go from my head, and I could breathe, and I could be grounded and present. I walk usually I would aim for 5 kilometers a day, and that's not very far really. And then I would go home, and then I would be able to deal with my family. You know, the people that you really need to prioritize, make time for in your life. So, yeah, just put it in there, schedule. And I'm not really, you know, advising anybody to get a dog, like some ways dogs. It's like they eat their own feces, who wants to deal with these creatures? But, you know, if it means that you're going to be out there walking and outside getting fresh air,
Yeah.
I got 2 dogs, who wants one?
I just find it's really hard to get out of that rabbit hole, because I'm one of these people that I always want to know everything, and I want to do my best, and I get like lost in it. So I probably need time limits or something.
Yeah, set a timer on your phone, and some apps, you can actually set a timer on the app when you start using them. Yeah. Phones are handy. Okay, well, thank you so much.